130 meters deep into the Arctic permafrost of Spitsbergen lies the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. It's not a museum. It's a $9 million insurance policy against the end of the world. As a species, we are obsessed with the failsafe. We build impenetrable boxes, high-security bunkers, and reinforced barriers to keep the variables of chaos at bay. We view this as the pinnacle of modern strategic engineering. But what if the blueprint for the world's most advanced failsafe wasn't written in a 21st century lab? What if it was documented 1,400 years ago in a 7th century record that historians are only now beginning to view through a scientific lens? Most ancient legends speak of magic walls or simple stone fortifications, but this specific account describes something radically different. A fused bimetallic barrier, a composite of iron and molten copper designed to withstand a high-entropy force that threatened to destabilize the ancient world. For centuries, skeptics called it a myth, but when you look at the chemistry of the build and the cold logic of the threat it was meant to contain, the myth starts to look more like a technical report. Was this just a story, or an engineering manual for a threat we are only now beginning to understand? Subscribe, because this episode might just change the way you see engineering history. To understand the scale of this project, we have to look past the kings and conquerors of the 7th century and identify a figure that functions more like a master architect, historically referred to as Dhul-Qarnayn. He is often framed as a ruler, but through the lens of proof vault, his actions describe a geopolitician and a structural engineer, a man responding to a systemic crisis at the edge of the known world. He wasn't met with a request for a miracle. He was met with a request for a solution. A vulnerable society was being systematically dismantled by a force known as Gog and Magog. If we strip away the mythological labels, Gog and Magog emerge as a high-entropy nomadic force. In sociobiology, this is a civilization that has bypassed the stage of production and entered a stage of pure consumption. They weren't monsters in the supernatural sense. They were a systemic glitch in the ancient world. A population surge so aggressive that it threatened the biological and economic stability of every neighboring region. They were the human equivalent of a locust swarm, creating a predator-prey imbalance that could only lead to one result: total societal collapse. The location wasn't chosen by chance. The Caucasus Mountains form a natural, massive continental wall between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. There are only a few narrow gateways through this 700-mile-long range. One of them is the Daryal Gorge, a bottleneck so tight that a single, well-engineered barrier could effectively quarantine an entire subcontinent. Our protagonist didn't just see a mountain pass. He saw a strategic choke point. He realized that to save a civilization, he didn't need a larger army. He needed a technological miracle of containment. And he was about to use a method of construction that defies the standard history of 7th century metallurgy. When we look for the manual behind this project, we don't find it in a modern engineering journal. We find it in the 18th chapter of a text written in the 7th century, the Quran. Verse 96 of this chapter doesn't describe a miracle of magic. It describes a miracle of metallurgy. To a casual reader, this is just a construction scene. To a materials scientist, this is a recipe for a bimetallic composite. Let's break down the chemistry of why this is brilliant. Iron is the backbone. It provides immense structural hardness and tension strength. But iron has a fatal flaw. It is highly susceptible to oxidation. Left alone in a mountain pass for centuries, iron rusts, becomes brittle, and eventually crumbles under its own weight. Copper, on the other hand, is a soft metal. On its own, It's useless for a defensive barrier. But copper is incredibly resistant to corrosion. By pouring molten copper over the heated iron blocks, the architect created a primitive but effective form of hot-dip galvanization. The copper acts as a sacrificial and protective sealant, bonding with the iron to create a shield that is virtually immune to the elements. We use this exact logic today in reinforced concrete. We use steel rebar to handle the tension, and concrete to handle the compression and environmental protection. One material provides the strength, the other provides the stability. If this barrier were made of pure iron, it would have been a pile of dust by the Middle Ages. If it were made of copper, it would have been torn down in a day. The proof isn't just in the existence of a wall. It's in the chemical synergy described 1,400 years ago. The question for the skeptic isn't whether the wall exists, but how a 7th century record accurately detailed the precise mechanics of bimetallic shielding, a technology that modern industrial engineering wouldn't fully master for another millennium. Every engineer knows that no structure is truly eternal. In physics, we call this entropy, the universal law that all organized systems inevitably move toward disorder. The 18th chapter of the record acknowledges this cold reality in verse 98. A time will come when even this bimetallic marvel will be leveled to the ground. Suddenly, one node in the center of Asia turns red and breaks, sending a ripple effect across the entire globe. In the ancient text, the collapse of the barrier leads to a surge, described as waves of people crashing into one another. To a modern skeptic, this might sound like apocalyptic prose. To a systems analyst, it sounds like systemic cascading failure. We see this today. Think of the 2008 financial crisis or the 2020 pandemic. When one barrier, be it a regulatory wall or a biological quarantine, is breached, the result isn't local, it's a wave. We live in a just-in-time world where the fragility of our supply chains means that a disruption in one region causes a surge of resource scarcity, inflation, and migration thousands of miles away. The threat of Gog and Magog isn't a story about monsters coming out of a cave. It's a study in societal entropy. The barrier represents order, the thin line of engineering and law that allows civilization to function. The surge represents what happens when that order fails. Modern sociologists call this the Great Reset, or systemic collapse, where a high-consumption population, no longer contained, washes over the resources of the organized world. The text frames the end of the barrier not as a magical event, but as a return to the natural state of chaos. It's a warning that our modern failsafes, our banks, our borders, our power grids, are just temporary dams, holding back an ocean of entropy. This is where the skeptic stops. If a massive iron and copper wall once sealed a mountain pass, why isn't it a tourist attraction today? It's a fair question, but to answer it, we have to understand how history swallows engineering. Look at the Derbent Wall. Known for centuries as the Caspian Gates, this massive fortification was built to seal the narrowest passage between the Caucasus and the sea. Historical records from the Byzantines to the Persians refer to this area as the Iron Gates. While the stone remains we see today date back to the 6th century, excavations have revealed something curious. The presence of ancient, sophisticated metallurgical techniques used to reinforce the most critical sections of the defense. But why don't we see the metal? First, there is geological overlay. In high seismic regions like the Caucasus, landslides aren't just common. They are transformative. We have modern examples, like the Wall of Gorge in Iran. This was the second longest wall in the ancient world. Yet it was almost entirely invisible, buried under meters of sediment until modern archaeology dug it out of the earth. Second is resource scavenging. In the ancient world, metal was the oil of the era. Once the political power that guarded the barrier collapsed, the the wall wouldn't just sit there. It would become the largest iron mine in the region. We see this with the Colosseum in Rome, where the iron clamps holding the stones together were scavenged, leaving the pockmarks we see today. The most durable evidence isn't the physical metal, it's the technological trace. Even if every gram of iron was melted down, the knowledge of the technique remains. A desert-dwelling author 1,400 years ago had no motive to invent a story about bimetallic metallurgical synergy unless they were documenting a physical reality that once stood as a sentinel against chaos. We've looked at this story through the lens of material science, geopolitics, and systemic entropy. We see the logic in the metallurgy. We see the strategy in the geography. And we see the warning in the sociology. At Proof Vault, we don't ask you to believe. We ask you to observe. So, we are left with the ultimate anomaly. How did a text written 1,400 years ago in a desert, thousands of miles from the metallurgical hubs of the North, describe the precise chemical fusion of a bimetallic barrier and the exact mechanics of global systemic collapse that modern sociologists are only now beginning to model? Subscribe, because the next episode might just change the way you see history.